The evening at Bellini's restaurant started like any other Friday night. The place was busy with people talking, laughing, and enjoying their meals. The soft lights made the dark wood tables glow, and the smell of fresh bread and garlic filled the air. Bellini's was one of the most popular places to eat in downtown Los Angeles, known for its good food and beautiful setting. Jack Miller, the restaurant manager, stood at his small desk near the front door. He was a tall man in his 40s with a friendly face and careful eyes that missed nothing. Jack looked at his reservation book and then at the crowd. He felt proud. The restaurant was almost full, and it was only 7 o'clock. "We're going to have a good night," Jack said to Susan Adams, the hostess who stood nearby in her black dress. Susan nodded and smiled. She had worked at Bellini's for 5 years and knew how to make guests feel welcome as soon as they walked. And just then the front door opened. The cool night air rushed in along with a man that made Susan's eyes widen. Clint Eastwood, the famous actor and director, walked into Bellini's. He wasn't wearing anything special, just a simple gray jacket, over a white shirt and dark pants. But there was no mistaking who he was. Even at his age, he stood straight and tall with that same strong look in his eyes that had made him famous in movies for over 60 years. Behind Eastwood was a younger man in a black suit, clearly his driver. The driver, Steve Powell, stayed a few steps back, quiet and watchful. Susan took a deep breath and put on her professional smile. She knew that famous people sometimes came to Bellini's, and the rule was to treat them with respect, but not make a big deal about who they were. "Good evening, Mr. Eastwood. Would you like a table for two?" she asked in a clear, friendly voice. Eastwood nodded. "That would be fine, thank you," he said in that familiar, rough voice that had delivered so many famous movie lines. Susan reached for 2 menus, but before she could show them to a table, Peter Grant stepped between them. Peter was the assistant manager who had started working at Bellini's only 3 weeks ago. He was young, maybe 30, with slicked back hair and a tight smile that never reached his eyes. "Is there a problem?" Peter asked, looking at Susan, not at Eastwood. "No problem," Susan said. "I was just going to seat Mr. Eastwood and his companion." Peter's eyes moved to Eastwood now, and something flashed across his face. It might have been surprise, but it changed quickly to something else, something cold. "I'm sorry, but we're fully booked tonight," Peter said, his voice flat. Susan looked confused. "But we have several free tables, and Mr. Miller just said—" "Those are all reserved." Peter cut her off. "We can't seat anyone without a reservation. On a Friday night. It's policy." This wasn't true. Bellini's always kept a few tables open for walk-in guests, especially important ones. Susan looked over at Jack for help, but he had stepped into the back office to deal with a delivery issue and hadn't seen Eastwood come in. Eastwood didn't say anything. His face stayed calm, but one eyebrow went up slightly. Around them, people at nearby tables had started to notice what was happening. A few were whispering to each other, pointing discreetly. Steve, Eastwood's driver, stepped forward. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding," he said quietly. "We'd be happy to wait at the bar if that helps." Peter's smile got tighter. "The bar is full too. Perhaps you could try the diner across the street? I hear they're very accommodating." The way he said accommodating made it sound like an insult. Susan couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her face felt hot with embarrassment. A couple sitting near the entrance recognized Eastwood. The woman, Lisa Wright, leaned toward her husband Frank and whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "That's Clint Eastwood. How can they treat him like that?" Her husband shook his head in disapproval. Just when Susan was about to speak up again, Peter seemed to change his mind. "Well, I suppose we could try to find something," he said with a sigh, as if he was doing them a big favor. "Follow me." Peter led Eastwood and Steve through the restaurant, past all the good tables in the main dining area. They walked past the large windows with views of the city lights, past the comfortable corner booths, and even past the regular tables in the center of the room. Several of these tables were empty, with reserved signs that Susan knew weren't for real reservations. Instead, Peter took them all the way to the back of the restaurant, to a small table right next to the swinging kitchen doors. It was the worst spot in the entire place. The table was smaller than the others and wobbled on uneven legs. Every time the kitchen doors opened, which was every few seconds, a blast of hot, steamy air would hit anyone sitting there. The noise from the kitchen was loud too. Shouts. From the cooks, the clatter of pots and pans, the hiss of the dishwashing machine. "Will this be suitable?" Peter asked, not sounding like he cared about the answer. Eastwood looked at the table, then at the swinging doors, then back at Peter. For a moment, Susan thought he might say something sharp or even leave. Most famous people would have. But Eastwood just nodded once and sat down. Steve joined him, looking uncomfortable. Peter placed 2 menus on the table and walked away without another word. He didn't offer water or tell them who their server would be, which was standard practice at Bellini's. "I'll send your server right over," Susan said quickly, trying to make up for Peter's rudeness. She gave them an apologetic smile before hurrying back to her post, already planning to find Jack as soon as possible. Eastwood and Steve sat at the wobbly table for 10 minutes before anyone came to help them. Around them, the restaurant continued to buzz with activity. Servers moved quickly between tables, bringing food and drinks to other guests. People laughed and talked, but no one came to their table. Finally, a waitress named Nancy Bell approached them. She was in her late 20s, with tired eyes and blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She didn't smile when she reached their table. "We're short-staffed tonight," she said without looking directly at either man. She dropped 2 water glasses on the table, sloshing some water over the sides. "Are you ready to order, or do you need more time?" "I think we're ready," Eastwood said calmly. "I'll have the steak medium rare and just water is fine." "I'll try the house special," Steve added. Nancy wrote down their orders without comment and walked away. She didn't tell them about the daily specials or ask if they wanted appetizers first, which was part of the normal service at Bellini's. As they waited for their food, another group was seated at a table near the windows. They ordered after Eastwood and Steve, but their food came out first. Then another table received their meals, and another. An hour passed. The kitchen doors kept swinging open next to them, each time hitting the back of Eastwood's chair slightly. Neither man complained. They talked quietly to each other, sometimes pausing when the kitchen noise got too loud. Other guests in the restaurant had noticed what was happening. Some looked embarrassed or angry on Eastwood's behalf. A few took discreet photos with their phones. One older couple even stopped by their table on the way out to shake Eastwood's hand and tell him they loved his movies. The evening at Bellini's had just begun, but already it was turning into a night that would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. And in a quiet corner of the restaurant, completely unnoticed so far, another famous person was watching everything with growing anger. When the food finally arrived at Clint Eastwood's table, it was almost 8:30. Most people who had come in after them were already finishing their meals or paying their bills. The kitchen doors swung open, and Nancy appeared with 2 plates. She set them down without a word and turned to leave. "Excuse me," Steve said before she could walk away. "Could we get some salt and pepper?" Nancy sighed as if this was a huge request. "Fine. Give me a minute." She walked away quickly, disappearing through the kitchen doors. Eastwood looked down at his steak. He had ordered it medium rare, but the meat on his plate was gray and tough-looking. When he cut into it, there was no pink inside at all. Steak was well done and cold, as if it had been sitting out for some time before being brought to their table. The vegetables next to it were soggy, and the mashed potatoes had a hard skin on top from sitting under a heat lamp too long. Steve's dish didn't look any better. He had ordered the house special, which was supposed to be fresh fish with a special sauce, rice, and seasonal vegetables. But the fish on his plate was dry and small, the sauce was missing, and instead of the advertised vegetables, there was only a small pile of plain rice. "Is your food okay?" Steve asked Eastwood quietly. Eastwood took a bite of his steak and had to work to chew it. "I've had better," he said simply. Nancy never returned with the salt and pepper. Other servers walked past their table many times, but none offered to help. It was as if they had been told to ignore the 2 men at the bad table. At a nearby table, Lisa Wright was still watching what was happening. She had been there with her husband Frank when Eastwood first arrived, and she couldn't believe how the famous actor was being treated. "This is just wrong," she whispered to Frank. "Someone should do something." Frank nodded. "If I were him, I would have walked out by now." "That's probably what they want," Lisa said. "I think that awful assistant manager is trying to make him leave." More people in the restaurant had noticed the situation. Some were taking pictures discreetly. Others whispered to each other, pointing when they thought no one was looking. It was becoming the main event of the evening, watching how one of the most famous actors in America was being treated poorly, and how he was handling it with quiet dignity. Peter Grant, the assistant manager, walked by their table several times but never stopped to ask if everything was okay, which was something he did at every other table. Instead, he seemed to be showing off to the other staff, walking with his chest puffed out, occasionally glancing at Eastwood with a small smile that wasn't friendly. Eastwood ate what he could of his steak, which wasn't much. Steve managed to finish most of his fish and rice, though he didn't look happy about it. When they were done, they sat waiting for someone to clear their plates or offer dessert menus. No one came. Finally, after 15 minutes of being ignored, Eastwood caught the eye of a young busboy who was clearing a nearby table. "Could we get our check, please?" Eastwood asked politely. The busboy, who looked about 19, seemed nervous. "I'll tell your server, sir," he said. He quickly gathered their plates and hurried away. Another 10 minutes passed. The restaurant was getting less crowded now as the early dinner crowd left. Nancy finally appeared with a black folder containing their bill. She dropped it on the table without a word and walked away again. When Eastwood opened the folder, his eyebrows went up slightly. The bill was much higher than it should have been. They had been charged for 2 appetizers they never ordered or received. There was also a charge for a bottle of expensive wine, which they hadn't ordered either. The prices for their actual meals seemed higher than what was listed on the menu. "There's a problem with the bill," Eastwood said when Nancy walked by again. She stopped and put her hand on her hip. "What's the problem?" "We're being charged for items we didn't order," Steve explained. "We didn't have any appetizers or wine." Nancy's face turned slightly red. "I'll have to get the manager," she said, and walked away again. A few minutes later, Peter appeared at their table, the same cold smile on his face. "Is there an issue with your service tonight?" he asked, not sounding concerned at all. "The bill isn't correct," Eastwood said calmly. "We're being charged for food and drinks we didn't have." Peter picked up the bill and pretended to study it. "Everything seems in order to me. Perhaps you forgot what you ordered?" "We didn't order appetizers or wine," Steve said firmly. Peter's smile got even colder. "Our system doesn't make mistakes, but if you're unhappy with our service, perhaps you should dine somewhere more suitable next time. Somewhere that meets your Hollywood standards." The insult was clear. Peter was suggesting that Eastwood was lying about the bill because he was a demanding celebrity. Several people at nearby tables heard this and looked shocked. Eastwood didn't get angry. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at Peter for a long moment, his face calm but his eyes sharp. It was the same look he had given to bad guys in his famous Western movies. "I see," was all he said. Peter stood there, waiting for an argument. That didn't come. When Eastwood didn't say anything else, Peter seemed disappointed. "So will you be paying the bill as presented, or should I call the owner?" Eastwood reached for his wallet. "I'll pay it." Steve looked like he wanted to argue more, but Eastwood gave him a small shake of the head. It wasn't worth the fight. Eastwood took out his credit card and placed it in the folder. "Very good," Peter said, taking the folder. "I'll be right back." While they waited for Peter to return with the credit card receipt, a woman at a table across the room was watching everything. With growing anger, she was sitting with a man whose back was to Eastwood's table, so he couldn't see what was happening. But the woman could see it all. "This is absolutely disgraceful," she said to her companion in a British accent. "Do you see how they're treating him?" The man turned slightly in his chair, just enough to glance over his shoulder. When he saw Eastwood, his eyes widened. "Is that who I think it is?" he asked. "Yes, it's Clint Eastwood," the woman said. And they've had him sitting by the kitchen doors all night. His food was terrible, I could see it from here, and now they're arguing about the bill. The man's face was getting redder by the second. How long has this been going on? Since before we arrived, she said. It's been at least an hour and a half. That awful man in the cheap suit seems to be enjoying it. The man turned back to face his companion, but now he was watching Peter out of the corner of his eye. That's beyond unprofessional, he said, his voice low but intense. It's bloody insulting. The woman nodded. I know you want to stay low-key tonight, but some things can't be ignored, Diane, the man interrupted. He had a strong British accent, too, and something about his voice made people at nearby tables look over. Peter returned to Eastwood's table with the receipt. Eastwood signed it, adding a tip even after the terrible service. He stood up to leave, and Steve got up too. Thank you for dining with us, Peter said, not sounding thankful at all. We hope you enjoyed your evening. It was a final insult, pretending that everything had been fine when they all knew it hadn't been. Eastwood just nodded once and turned to leave. As Eastwood and Steve walked toward the front door, people in the restaurant watched. Some looked embarrassed about what they had seen. Others seemed angry on Eastwood's behalf. A few took final pictures, with their phones. The British man at the corner table stood up suddenly. Excuse me, Diane, he said. I need to have a word with someone. Diane Morgan sighed. I knew you couldn't stay out of it, just try not to make a scene. No promises, the man said as he pushed his chair back and started walking across the restaurant. People who saw him coming moved out of his way quickly. Gordon Ramsay, world-famous chef and TV personality, was about to get involved, and he looked angry. Gordon Ramsay moved through the restaurant with purpose. People who recognized him whispered to each other as he passed their tables. Gordon was famous for his cooking skills, his many restaurants around the world, and his television shows where he fixed failing restaurants. He was also known for his temper when he saw bad food or poor service. Tonight, Gordon had come to Bellini's quietly with his producer, Diane Morgan. They were in Los Angeles filming a new episode of his show, and they had wanted a nice, private dinner. Gordon hadn't planned to be recognized. He had been sitting in a corner table where most people couldn't see him, but he had seen everything that happened to Clint Eastwood, and he couldn't stay quiet any longer. Eastwood and his driver Steve were almost to the front door when Gordon caught up to them. Mr. Eastwood, Gordon said, his voice respectful but loud enough for others to hear. Excuse me. Eastwood turned around. He looked tired but curious. He clearly recognized Gordon, though he didn't show much surprise. I'm Gordon Ramsay, Gordon said, extending his hand. It's an honor to meet you, sir. Eastwood shook Gordon's hand. Likewise. I couldn't help but notice your dining experience tonight has been less than satisfactory, Gordon continued. His British accent became stronger when he was upset, as he was now. Eastwood gave a small smile. You could say that. It was disgraceful, Gordon said, not bothering to keep his voice down. Absolutely disgraceful. I've been watching from my table and I've never seen such poor treatment of any guest, let alone someone of your stature. By now, everyone in the front of the restaurant was watching and listening. Susan Adams, the hostess, looked uncomfortable. A few servers had stopped what they were doing to watch. Peter Grant, who had been smirking as Eastwood left, now stood frozen near the reservation desk. These things happen, Eastwood said with a shrug. He wasn't the type to make a scene. No, sir, they shouldn't happen, Gordon said firmly. Not in any decent restaurant. He turned to look directly at Peter. And I'd like a word with whoever is in charge here. Peter's face had lost its smug look. He had been happy to mistreat Clint Eastwood, but facing Gordon Ramsay was different. Gordon was famous for destroying people verbally when they served bad food or gave poor service. Peter had seen Gordon's shows. He knew what was coming. I'm actually the one in charge tonight, Peter said, his voice much less confident now. Gordon's eyes narrowed. Then you're the one responsible for this disgraceful service. Now wait a minute, Peter started, but Gordon cut him off. No, you wait, Gordon said, his voice rising. Do you realize who you've been treating like garbage all evening? This man is a Hollywood legend. He's won Academy Awards, he's made films that will be remembered forever, and you put him at the worst table in your restaurant, served him cold, overcooked food, and then had the nerve to try to overcharge him? People throughout the restaurant were watching now. Some had taken out their phones. Carol Thompson, a woman seated at a nearby table, had been recording since Gordon first approached Eastwood. She couldn't believe her luck. 2 famous people in one video. "We were very busy tonight," Peter tried to explain, his voice weak. "Busy?" Gordon repeated, his face getting red. "I counted at least 6 empty tables when Mr. Eastwood arrived. Good tables. I watched you walk him past all of them to put him by the kitchen doors. That wasn't because you were busy, that was deliberate." Peter looked around for help, but none of the other staff would meet his eyes. They all knew he had been wrong. Then the office door opened and Jack Miller, the real manager, came out. He had been in the back dealing with a delivery issue and a problem with the reservation system. He had no idea what had been happening in the dining room. "What's going on out here?" Jack asked, looking confused. Then he saw Clint Eastwood standing near the door and Gordon Ramsay looking angry, and his eyes went wide. "Oh my God. Are you the actual manager?" Gordon asked Jack. "Yes, I'm Jack Miller, the restaurant manager," Jack said, coming forward quickly. "Is there a problem?" "Is there a problem?" Gordon repeated, sounding amazed at the question. "Yes, there's a bloody problem. Your assistant manager here has spent the entire evening mistreating Mr. Eastwood. Terrible table, terrible service, terrible food, and then an incorrect bill. That's not just bad service, that's harassment." Jack looked horrified. He turned to Eastwood. "Mr. Eastwood, I can't apologize enough. I had no idea this was happening. I was in the back dealing with some issues, but that's no excuse." His voice was shaking. He was clearly upset and embarrassed. "Peter is new and wasn't authorized to make seating decisions," Jack continued, now glaring at Peter. "This is absolutely not how we treat our guests, any of our guests." Eastwood nodded, accepting the apology without words. He seemed ready to leave and put the whole thing behind him. But Gordon wasn't finished. "I've seen enough to know this isn't just about one employee," he said to Jack. "Your kitchen is disorganized, your timing is off, and your standards are abysmal. When a man who's given the world iconic films for decades can't get a properly cooked steak, you've failed at the most basic level of hospitality." Jack looked like he might cry. "You're right, Chef Ramsay. There's no excuse." By now, most of the people in the restaurant were watching the scene by the front door. Some were standing up to see better. Others were recording with their phones. The place had gone from a normal Friday night dinner to something that would probably be on social media within minutes. Diane Morgan, Gordon's producer, had joined them by this point. She stood slightly behind Gordon, watching everything with a professional eye. This wasn't supposed to be part of their evening, but she knew Gordon well enough to know he wouldn't let this go. "If this were my restaurant," Gordon continued, "I'd be ashamed. I'd close the doors right now and start over." Peter finally found his voice again. "You can't talk to us like that. You're not filming one of your shows here." It was the wrong thing to say. Gordon turned his full attention to Peter, stepping closer to him. "I'm not talking to you as a TV personality," Gordon said, his voice dangerously quiet now. "I'm talking to you as a chef who respects the hospitality industry and the people we serve. What you did tonight was unprofessional, unkind, and unacceptable. In any decent restaurant, you would be fired on the spot." Peter took a step back, bumping into the reservation desk. Jack looked at Peter with new understanding. "Wait, did you deliberately seat Mr. Eastwood by the kitchen and approve an incorrect bill?" Peter didn't answer, but his face said everything. "We'll discuss this later," Jack said firmly to Peter. Then he turned back to Eastwood. "Mr. Eastwood, please let me make this right. The meal is on the house, of course, and I'd like to invite you back as our special guest any time." Eastwood nodded. "Thank you, but that's not necessary." "At the very least, let me refund what you paid," Jack insisted. "Peter, get the refund started right now." Peter didn't move. He just stood there, looking angry and embarrassed. "Now, Peter," Jack said sharply. Peter finally moved toward the computer to process the refund. Gordon watched him go, then turned back to Eastwood. "I apologize for causing a scene, Mr. Eastwood, but some things shouldn't be allowed to happen." Eastwood gave Gordon a small smile. "No need to apologize. It's good to see someone who cares about doing things right." The two men shook hands, and many people in the restaurant applauded. It was a moment of respect between two professionals from different fields, both known for their high standards and hard work. As Eastwood and Steve finally left the restaurant, people outside who had heard about what was happening took pictures. The story of what happened at Bellini's that night was already spreading. Inside, Gordon turned back to Jack. "You and I need to have a serious talk about your restaurant." The next morning, Carol Thompson's video was everywhere. She had posted it online before she even left Bellini's the night before, and it had spread quickly. By breakfast time, millions of people had watched the famous chef Gordon Ramsay defend Clint Eastwood against poor treatment at a Los Angeles restaurant. News websites had headlines like, "Gordon Ramsay defends Clint Eastwood against restaurant mistreatment," and "Celebrity chef calls out disrespect to Hollywood legend." Television shows were talking about it. Radio hosts were discussing it. It had become much more than just a bad night at a restaurant. Jack Miller woke up to find his phone filled with messages. Some were from friends and family who had seen the news. Others were from reporters wanting comments. The most important ones were from the restaurant owner, who was not happy. Jack sat on the edge of his bed, his head in his hands. He had worked at Bellini's for 8 years. He had started as a waiter and worked his way up to manager. He loved the restaurant and was proud of it. Now, in one night, its reputation was damaged, and it was partly his fault. He should have been paying more attention. He shouldn't have left Peter in charge. After Clint Eastwood had left the restaurant the night before, Gordon Ramsay had taken Jack aside for a long talk. At first, Jack had been defensive, but Gordon had a way of cutting through excuses. "Your kitchen is a mess," Gordon had told him. "Your staff isn't properly trained, and you hired an assistant manager who thinks it's okay to mistreat people." Jack had to admit Gordon was right. There were problems at Bellini's that he had been ignoring. The kitchen was disorganized. Some of the staff needed better training, and Peter had been a mistake from the start. Gordon had been tough but fair. He had pointed out all the problems, but he had also offered advice on how to fix them. By the end of their talk, Jack felt both embarrassed and grateful. Now the morning, after he had to deal with the fallout, Jack called the restaurant owner first. Mr. Bellini was upset, as expected. He had built the restaurant's reputation over 20 years, and now it was being damaged by viral videos and news stories. "Fix this, Jack," Mr. Bellini said over the phone. "Whatever it takes, fix it." Jack promised he would. Then he made his next call to Peter Grant. "Peter, this is Jack. We need to talk about last night." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I know what you're going to say," Peter finally replied. "But it wasn't my fault. The kitchen was slow and—" "Stop," Jack interrupted. "I saw the video. I talked to the staff. I know exactly what happened. You deliberately gave Mr. Eastwood the worst table. You approved an incorrect bill. You were rude and disrespectful." "He's just another customer," Peter said. "Why should he get special treatment just because he's famous?" Jack sighed. "This isn't about special treatment, Peter. It's about basic respect and good service. You would have been wrong to treat anyone that way, famous or not." Jack paused, then continued firmly. "I'm sorry, but you're fired. Please don't come in today." Peter started to argue, but Jack ended the call. That was one problem dealt with, but there were many more to fix. An hour later, Jack was at Bellini's meeting with the remaining staff before opening time. The restaurant would normally open for lunch at 11, but today was different. Jack had decided to delay opening until dinner. "We have work to do," he told everyone gathered in the dining room. All the servers were there, including Nancy Bell, who had been Eastwood's waitress. The kitchen staff was there too, looking tired and worried. "Last night, we failed," Jack said simply. "We failed to provide good service to a guest. We failed to maintain our standards. And now everyone knows about it." No one argued. They had all seen the video, and most of them had witnessed what happened in person. But this is our chance to do better, Jack continued. Starting today, we're going to fix the problems in this restaurant. We're going to retrain. We're going to reorganize the kitchen. We're going to make sure every guest gets excellent service no matter who they are. Some of the staff nodded. Others looked skeptical. Nancy didn't meet Jack's eyes. Nancy, Jack said, making her look up. You were part of the problem last night. Your service was poor, and you knew it. Nancy's face turned red, but she didn't deny it. I was having a bad day, she said quietly. My boyfriend and I had a big fight before my shift, and I was upset. But that's no excuse. I should have been professional. Jack appreciated her honesty. We all have bad days, but we can't let that affect how we treat our guests. He looked around at all the staff. Anyone who can't commit to providing excellent service to every guest, every time, should leave now. No hard feelings. This job isn't for everyone. No, one moved. Despite the problems, they were a good team overall. They wanted to do better. Good, Jack said. Now let's get to work. The rest of the day was busy. Jack reorganized the kitchen, working with the head chef to create a better system. He held training sessions with the servers, going over proper service techniques. He even called a professional cleaner to deep clean the entire restaurant. In the middle of all this activity, Jack got a surprising phone call. Jack Miller? This is Diane Morgan, Gordon Ramsay's producer. Jack stepped into his office to take the call privately. Yes, Ms. Morgan, what can I do for you? Gordon asked me to call you, Diane said. He was impressed by your willingness to accept criticism last night. He thinks Bellini's has potential despite the problems. Jack wasn't sure where this was going. Thank you, I guess. Gordon would like to help, Diane continued. He's in Los Angeles for another week, filming a show. He's offering to consult with you, help you rebuild your restaurant's reputation. No cameras, no show, just professional advice. Jack was stunned. Gordon Ramsay was famous for fixing failing restaurants on his TV shows. But those were public, often humiliating experiences for the restaurants involved. This was different. A private offer of help. Why would he do that, Jack asked. He respects people who want to improve, Diane explained. And he was impressed by how Mr. Eastwood handled himself last night. He sees this as a chance to turn a bad situation into something positive. Jack thought about it for only a moment. Yes, we would be very grateful for his help. Good, Diane said. Gordon will come by tomorrow morning at 9. Be ready to work hard. After the call ended, Jack sat at his desk, feeling a mix of emotions. He was still embarrassed about what had happened, still worried about the restaurant's future. But for the first time since the incident, he felt hopeful. With Gordon's help, maybe they could fix this. Later that afternoon, Nancy approached Jack as he was checking the newly reorganized reservation system. I owe you an apology, she said. And I owe Mr. Eastwood one too. I've been thinking about it all day. My personal problems are no excuse for how I treated him. Jack nodded. I appreciate that, Nancy. We all make mistakes. The important thing is to learn from them. I was thinking, Nancy said hesitantly, maybe I could write him a letter to apologize. I know he probably won't read it, but I need to do something. I think that's a good idea, Jack said. I'll make sure it gets to his people. As Jack continued working through the day, he kept thinking about what Gordon had said the night before. This wasn't just about one bad employee or one bad night. It was about the whole culture of the restaurant. That would take time to fix, but Jack was determined to do it. By the end of the day, Bellini's looked different. The kitchen was reorganized. The reservation system was fixed. The dining room was spotless. But the real test would come when they reopened for dinner the next day. Would people still come to Bellini's after what had happened? And if they did, would the restaurant be ready to give them the excellent service that Jack was now determined to provide? 3 months passed since the night when Clint Eastwood was treated poorly at Bellini's restaurant. In that time, many things had changed. The restaurant had closed for 2 weeks after the incident. During that time, Gordon Ramsay worked with Jack Miller and the staff every day. Gordon brought in new equipment for the kitchen. He helped create a new menu that the kitchen could prepare properly. He trained the servers on how to provide excellent service to every guest. Most importantly, he taught Jack how to be a better manager. "Your job isn't just to keep the restaurant running," Gordon had told Jack. "It's to make sure every guest has an excellent experience. That means you need to be in the dining room, watching everything, fixing problems before they become big issues." Jack took this advice to heart. When Bellini's reopened, he spent most of his time in the dining room, greeting guests, checking on tables, making sure everything was perfect. He hired a new assistant manager, Maria Garcia, who shared his commitment to excellent service. The restaurant struggled at first. Some people stayed away because of the bad publicity. Others came just to see the place where the famous incident had happened. But slowly, as word spread about the improved food and service, regular customers began to return. New customers came too. Nancy Bell was still working at Bellini's. After writing her apology letter to Clint Eastwood, she had asked Jack if she could stay. Jack had agreed, but with conditions. Nancy had to retrain completely and prove that she could provide excellent service. She worked hard to meet these conditions, and now she was one of the best servers in the restaurant. Peter Grant, the former assistant manager who had caused the problems, had not done well after being fired. He had tried to get jobs at other restaurants, but the viral video made that difficult. Most places didn't want to hire someone known for mistreating Clint Eastwood. Peter finally found work at a small diner outside the city, where he had to start at the bottom as a busboy. It was a hard lesson, but perhaps a necessary one. Gordon Ramsay's help had been invaluable. He had not mentioned his work with Bellini's on any of his shows or social media. He had simply helped because he wanted to, not for publicity. But people in the restaurant industry knew about it, and they respected both Gordon and Jack for turning things around. On a warm evening in June, Jack was at his usual spot near the front of the restaurant, watching over the dinner service when Susan Adams, the hostess, approached him with wide eyes. "Jack," she whispered, "you won't believe who just pulled up outside." Jack looked toward the door, and his heart skipped a beat. A familiar car had stopped in front of the restaurant. The driver, Steve Powell, got out and opened the back door, and out stepped Clint Eastwood. This time Eastwood wasn't alone. He had brought his family with him, his wife and several adult children. They were all dressed nicely, clearly out for a special dinner. Jack took a deep breath and walked to the door. He opened it just as Eastwood reached it. "Good evening, Mr. Eastwood," Jack said, working hard to keep his voice steady. "Welcome back to Bellini's." Eastwood gave a small nod. "Thank you. Table for 6 if you have room." "We always have room for you, sir," Jack said sincerely. "Please follow me." As Jack led the Eastwood family through the restaurant, other diners noticed who had arrived. Some whispered to each other, others tried not to stare. Everyone knew about what had happened 3 months ago. Jack led the family to the best table in the house, a large corner booth with comfortable seats and a good view of both the restaurant and the city lights outside the windows. It was as far from the kitchen doors as possible. "Will this be suitable?" Jack asked. Eastwood looked around, then nodded. "Perfect." Jack personally handed out menus to everyone, then signaled to Nancy, who was working nearby. Nancy approached the table with a professional smile. If she was nervous about serving Clint Eastwood again, she didn't show it. "Good evening," she said. "My name is Nancy, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with some drinks?" Eastwood looked at her for a moment, perhaps recognizing her from before. But if he did, he didn't mention it. He just ordered water, as did most of his family. As Nancy went to get their drinks, Jack leaned closer to Eastwood. "Mr. Eastwood, I want you to know how sorry we are about what happened during your last visit. We've made many changes since then." Eastwood nodded. "So I've heard, that's why we came back. Everyone deserves a second chance." "Thank you," Jack said simply. "I promise you won't regret it." Throughout the evening, the service was perfect. Nancy was attentive but not intrusive. The food came out hot and delicious, exactly as ordered. Everything was as it should be at a good restaurant. Near the end of the meal, when the Eastwood family was enjoying dessert, the kitchen door opened and a familiar face appeared. Gordon Ramsay had returned to Bellini's to check on things as he sometimes did. He noticed Eastwood right away and walked over to say hello. "Mr. Eastwood," Gordon said with a smile. "Good to see you again, under better circumstances this time." Eastwood stood and shook Gordon's hand. "Chef Ramsay, I heard you helped turn this place around." Gordon shrugged modestly. "Jack and his team did most of the work. I just pointed them in the right direction." The two men chatted for a few minutes. Other diners watched with interest. Here were two famous professionals, both known for excellence in their fields, having a friendly conversation in the middle of Bellini's, the same restaurant where they had faced off 3 months earlier. Before leaving, Eastwood made a point of speaking to Jack again. "The meal was excellent," he said. "Much better than last time." Jack smiled. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." "I'll be back," Eastwood said, "and I'll tell others too." It was the best review Jack could have hoped for. After the Eastwood family left, Jack found Nancy in the kitchen taking a short break. "You did great," he told her. Nancy smiled, looking relieved. "I was so nervous. I kept thinking about how terrible I was to him last time. But today you were professional," Jack said. "That's what matters." Later that night, after the restaurant closed, Jack sat alone in the dining room, thinking about how far they had come. The viral video that had seemed like a disaster had turned out to be the thing that saved Bellini's. Without it, they might have continued with their bad habits, gradually losing customers and reputation. Instead, they had been forced to confront their problems and fix them. Gordon Ramsay had helped, of course, but the real change had come from within, from Jack and his team deciding to do better, to be better. A few days later, a new review of Bellini's appeared in a major food magazine. The reviewer mentioned the infamous incident with Clint Eastwood, but focused more on the remarkable turnaround the restaurant had made. "Bellini's stands as a testament to the power of second chances," the review concluded. "What could have been the end of a restaurant has instead become a new beginning. The food is excellent, the service impeccable, and the atmosphere welcoming to all guests, famous or not." Jack had the review framed and hung near the entrance of the restaurant. It was a reminder of how bad things had been, and how good they could be when everyone committed to excellence. As for Peter Grant, he eventually worked his way up from busboy to server at the small diner where he had found work. He kept a copy of the viral video on his phone, not to show others but to remind himself of his biggest mistake. It was a harsh lesson, but one he needed to learn. In the service industry, every guest deserves respect and good treatment, regardless of who they are. The story of what happened at Bellini's became something of a legend in the restaurant world, a cautionary tale about bad service, but also an inspiring story about redemption and second chances. And it all began on that Friday night when Clint Eastwood walked in, looking for a simple meal, and Gordon Ramsay decided to stand up for what was right.